then he says in verse 9, those things which you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, do these things. In other words, follow my teaching, and the God of peace will be with you. You know, the God of peace will be with you when you follow what the Lord wants you to do. It's so simple. I find so often that there are Christians who are in distress, and one thing that does trouble me is the number of Christians who suffer depression. Why? Why? I'm not depressed. I don't get depressed. Why? Because I count my blessings. And if you sit down and count your blessings and you rejoice, suddenly the peace of the Lord is with you and you are in peace. And I would challenge even Christian teachers to teach more on this rather than simply allowing depressions and fears. And I hear about preachers suffering burnout. Oh, come on, I've never been burnt out. I burn up with fire, not burn out. Come on. When I spent 3 months with 400 people in Siberia all those years ago, and that's almost 30 years ago, and we traveled under great difficulties. Sometimes we had no food, sometimes no sleep or whatever, but we weren't burned out. When I came back, just 4 weeks to recuperate and to get all my personal details sorted out, and I was off down into the Ukraine for another month. And before I went to Siberia, I had a month in Belarus. Is that burnout? No, it's burning up with fire. And in verse 11, he clarifies this, not that I speak in respect of want, because I've learned in whatsoever state I am, there to be content. And boy, did he know, because in verse 12 he says, I know how to be hungry and without, and I know how to have plenty. Everywhere in all things I'm instructed, both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. So he goes from one extreme to the other. And in his life, he has literally experienced. And some Christians don't understand that there are times when we have to be like this. I mean, if you look at my life, I don't want to be too much of an example or illustration, but I can tell you, since through these last 60 years, there are times when I've been hungry. I can remember a time when I was married and 2 twin girls, young children, and I had no food. No food. We lived on mushrooms, I think, for a week. And I've known what it is to have poverty, not to be able to pay the bills. But not that that's suffering, but I've learned to live in that and also in plenty. And just as I've had hunger, I've had an overabundance. Just as I've had poverty, I've had times when I have plenty. And, you know, the amazing thing is this, for example, he goes on later to say that he says here, give thanks to the Lord who strengthens him, and notwithstanding you've done well that you did communicate with my afflictions. And in verse 15, Philippians know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left from Macedonia, no church communicated with me concerning giving and receiving, and only you. So even Paul had the experience that when he set off on his missionary journey, the churches didn't supply his needs. And one thing that grieved me, I suppose it did grieve me, was the fact that when I was in that prison, you all know, 1972 to 73, a year in a communist prison, the churches did not support my wife. They wanted to sell my house. They sold everything else. My children had to leave school early to get work to support the mother. it's sad, but talking to you who are listening to me, I want to thank God for your support. Just as Paul is speaking to the Philippian church and saying, you were the only ones who supported. And I thank God that I could not do what I do now without your support. We desperately need financial prayer support in order to do the work. And there have been times when, yes, in the mission we could hardly pay the bills. I know. Because in the mission, we spend everything right up. We try, hopefully, to balance the books at the end of the year, and to end a year without having substantial debt. But the thing is, we need the support in order to do the work. And this is an expression not just of your love for us, but of your love for the Lord. Because he puts it quite bluntly that the purpose of it is that he might be able to preach the gospel. That's what he's saying. And he says, if I look at the new version, he says for example, in verse 12, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in need. I can do everything because he gives me strength. But it's good of you to share in my troubles. And then he says, when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid again when I was in need. Not that I'm looking for a gift, but I'm looking for what may be credited to your account. Wow. He's very blunt here, and I'm reading from the New Translation. He says, not that I'm looking for a gift, but I'm looking that you spiritually may receive credit for what you give for the furtherance of the gospel. He says, I have, verse 18, I have received full payment and even more. I'm amply supplied now that I've received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. They're a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice pleasing to God. And this is the wonderful thing, as you give sacrificially, Paul says, as you give sacrificially, my God, verse 19, my God will supply all your needs according to his glorious riches in Christ. What a wonderful promise. What a wonderful promise. My God will supply all your need. When you are committed in the gospel and support the gospel, stand on this, that when you give to the extension of the kingdom, then God will supply all your need. Wow. What a challenge to end on. Give as unto the Lord for the extension of the kingdom, and then stand by faith that however much you give, God will then take the responsibility to supply all your needs. God bless you. Thank you for your support. Keep going. Amen.